things. We began this morning with a 15-minute opportunity for anyone who wanted to offer public comment on our rulemaking. So that's why some are on at 9:45, because we allotted that time in case someone wanted to come in and offer public comment. No one did. And my understanding is no one has offered public comment in writing as well. So we'll start the work session now, and I'm going to turn it over to Glenna to do introductions for us.
Okay, super. Thank you. Hi, Tracy. It's good to see you. I don't think we've met before. So I'm really appreciative that Tracy Cordero is able to be here and provide this opportunity for anti-racism in education training. I think it's really crucial as school authorizers and as charter school division staff that we really look through our lenses of equity and try not to repeat some of the errors of the past that brought about the lawsuit in New Mexico. So I think that this is going to be a great training, and I'm really, again, thankful to Tracy and for Karina for making this happen for us today. Tracy, did you want to do a little introduction about yourself, or do we want to go around and do some brief introductions? Do you think that would be beneficial?
Good morning, everybody. I have a little bit of an introduction activity built into my time with you all together. And so if it's okay, we can go that route.
Super.
Great. And will I be able to share my screen? It looks like I can. Okay. Can I get a quick thumbs up if you can see and hear me okay? Thank you. Okay, good morning, everybody. I really appreciate your willingness to have me here. Thank you so much, Glenna, for the invitation, and for to all of you for allowing me to spend some time with you today. My name is Tracy Cordero. I'm Tracy Cordero. I'm from Coach T. Pueblo. I am the director for the Indigenous Montessori Institute, which is a program started off as a teacher training program for the Caris Children's Learning Center. And I'll be talking with you, what I'm going to share with you all this morning comes from our work as a school and teacher training center, but very much founded and guided on the work and philosophy and teachings of Dr. Joseph Henry Sweeney, who I'm sure all of you have heard about or known in some capacity. And if you haven't, you're missing out. So I would encourage you to make that happen. But a lot of what I'm going to share with you is directly from him. He was one of the KCLC founding board members, so the Caris Children's Learning Center founding board members. He is an advisory board member now. He's a tribal councilman. He's a professor emeritus out of UNM, and he's in tribal leadership again for our community this year. And so he's not able to be here with me today, but I am still excited that I'll be able to share with you all the just tons of knowledge and wisdom that he has guided our school and our community with. Just a quick little bit of background about, the basis for everything that I'm going to share with you all. Our school, the Caris Children's Learning Center, is an independent, nonprofit language revitalization Montessori school. Okay, and so we don't accept any state or federal money, and it's because we use the Montessori pedagogy, an internationally renowned way of doing education. And we do language immersion, Caris language immersion. And so that means all of our kiddos get all of the academic content, science, math, reading, writing in Caris, even though our language is an oral only language. So our language, we don't read and write, but that doesn't deter us from doing immersion. Out of our school program, we have the school every day. We have parent seminar. We have a Keros Immersion mentor apprenticeship, which I also oversee. We have an outdoor classroom component, and then every year we host the Native Language Symposium. And then I'm the director of the Indigenous Montessori Institute, which does all of these other things that are more big picture outside of the community. That is teacher training, which consists of the philosophy of Indigenous education, AMI Montessori training. So both out of that teacher training, our graduates come out with an international Montessori diploma that would allow them to teach in any Montessori school around the world after our program. And then we do professional development and technical assistance, which is how I'm spending my time with you all today. We do advocacy work for policy change. And then we manage the Indigenous Montessori Network, which is a nationwide resource hub for Indigenous Montessori schools. So we're a really tiny school. Like if you see us, literally we're tiny, but we do a whole lot of big stuff. And so thank you for allowing me to share with you all that out of our little hub of a school here, we've got some big ideas and hopefully big changes when we think about education. This is just a quick look at our PI training scope and sequence. And so everything that I'm going to share with you all today is pulled from this entire training scope and sequence, which consists of these 10 modules over, a semester, an academic year, and then a summer term of training. We're accepting applications. So after this presentation, if any of you want to enroll, we'll gladly have you. Just some information. Okay, and here we are. We're going to start with our waterfall chat exercise. So this is a waterfall chat. That means nobody put this information in the chat until I say go. But for right now, please type out your name or how you'd like to be referred to in this time together. Your name, your pronouns, where you're calling in from, and one word that describes what you hope to get out of today's session. So if you could go ahead in the chat, don't push enter yet. Don't push enter yet. We just want to give you time to type it out, your name or how you'd like to be referred to, pronouns, where you're calling in from, and one word that describes what you hope to get out of today's session. So take a few minutes or just, a couple more seconds, let you enter that. And then when I say go, everybody is going to push enter at the same time, and we'll just watch the chat explode with this awesome information. Okay, so type in this information for us, and then in 3 seconds, I'm going to ask you to push go or enter. 1, 2, 3, enter. There we go. Thank you so much. Okay, we've got Stephen, who's hoping for understanding. Patty is hope. Georgina Davis, information. David, whatever. Albuquerque, question marks. Okay, David, we hope that we're going to help you get a little more clear here by the end of our time. And then Missy Brown, understanding. Karina Chavez, understanding. Hi, Karina. Becca, understanding. Glenna, understanding. Melissa, knowledge. Dylan, understanding. Hope, enlightenment, knowledge. Valerie, Mike, understanding. Clarity from Beverly, and understanding. Good. So I'll say for the majority, looks like we're all on the same page about wanting some understanding in some way. It's really nice to see the word hope in there because I think in the positions that you all serve on the PEC, that's like a crucial characteristic and want for the education of all of our children. Thank you, Debbie, for inputting there, understanding. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your name, your pronouns, where you're calling in from, and what it is you hope to get out of today's session. Because I'm from Coach T, because that's my worldview, that's my Coach T way of life, is how I make sense of the world and operate from. And then because I work for the Cares Children's Learning Center and the Indigenous Montessori Institute, I'm going to let you know right now that a lot of my emphasis is on Indigenous people. So no surprises when I keep saying Indigenous and Native Indigenous, because that's all I know. Part of our teacher training, part of the policy work that we aim to do, and a standard practice for us, is starting off our work, our time with everyone by doing a land acknowledgement. And when we think about anti-racist approaches to education, we want education to be accurate, right? We want education to be based in truth-telling. And when we think about truth-telling, what we know is true is that when settlers first arrived here, this land that is now the United States was thriving with Indigenous people. But because of colonization, because of 500 years and generations of Indian federal policy that has been intentional about disrupting attempted termination of our way of life, we don't always acknowledge that the land we're on at some point belonged to Indigenous people. At some point was a sacred place of prayer, a sacred place of being. And just because now there's city limit signs and county limit signs, that doesn't mean that that wasn't the truth. That isn't the truth. And so I will start by saying I'm calling in from, thank goodness, my people's traditional and ancestral homelands of Coach T Pueblo. And so my people, my specific Pueblo, have been in this area since time immemorial. And we're one of the few tribes in the entire country that still gets to say that. And despite, right, the intentional removal, we've been able, through prayer, through wisdom, through knowledge, through science, through peace, been able to be here where we were meant to be in this world. And so I invite you all to, just if you don't already practice this, if you don't already think this is important, check into it and do the work to figure out why this might be important to anti-racist education. And then the quote I have up here is from 1970s Talk to Teachers from Chief Dan George. And he reminds us, what, again, Indigenous education, right? That's my emphasis, that us Indigenous people, we are a people with special rights guaranteed to us by promises and treaties. So we operate with the state government, with the federal government as a government. So it's a government to government relationship, right? In any one of those capacities. And this is not special treatment. These are unique legal rights guaranteed to us because of the intentional federal policy that has disrupted our way of life. And so we don't beg for these rights, nor do we thank you, because we've paid for them, right? And with our culture, with our dignity, with our self-respect, with our lands, with our people, with our languages, on and on and on. And so that is the frame of all of the anti-racist work that we do. And so I will say, maybe some of you are a bit surprised that we're just coming in this strong and heavy when we talk about anti-racism. But what we know, especially for Indigenous communities, is that we don't have any more time left to justify or negotiate or debate about what anti-racist work means and why it's important. At the end of our time together, I hope this is what you'll leave with. You'll be able to explain why land acknowledgements are crucial to anti-racist education. You'll be able to define the listed terms that we're going to go over. You'll be able to describe white supremacy culture and culture characteristics. And you'll be able to list at least 3 ways we can practice anti-education. We're going to start off with some definitions, just because it's been my experience that, especially when I say white supremacy culture or white supremacy, because of the trauma that has been for this country, a lot of people instantly go to like hate groups, right? Instantly go to KKK when we hear the term white supremacy. And for us, when we do anti-racist work, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a system that had been intentionally set up to disadvantage everybody who did not present as white. And so we'll dive more into that, but I just want to give you a little bit of a heads up that you're going to hear me say that often. And I want you to know off the bat that I'm not talking about KKK. I'm not making accusations. I'm not talking about individual white folks. I'm talking about a system. And that's the term that refers to that system, white supremacy culture. So again, we're going to start off with some shared vocabulary. And because of the authority, because of the power that your positions come with, for us, it is absolutely crucial that because you have influence over what the educational experience for our babies in the state is going to be, we want to be explicitly clear about these heavy duty, like trauma causing terms and concepts and sometimes ways of operating. And so we're explicit about racism. We're explicit that this is something that absolutely exists in our society. We're not going to debate that with you all or with anybody, right? We're not going to justify it. If you don't believe it, then the challenge is you go do the research and prove to me that it doesn't exist, because I can show you plenty of data points that says otherwise. So to start us off, we're talking about race. All the information and all the research that we have about this country since, it's an inception as what we know it today, is that race is not at all biological. It's an evolving social construct, right? That was created to legitimize racial inequality and protect whiteness and white advantage, right? And so race is not about physical and biological attributes. It's not science. Race is not based in science, right? It's based in power. It's a social construct to concentrate power for a specific group of people. And then the system supports that concentration of power. And we know this because at one point, the early settlers were willing to be in peace with Indigenous folks, right? There was a back and forth mutual beneficial relationship. We know this at one point, Irish people were not considered white, and they were experiencing racism. But it wasn't until it became a numbers game, right? It wasn't until colonizers needed more people on their side to continue to take and loot resources from Indigenous folks that, okay, now Irish equals white, right? Now you can check that box that is about physical attribution. And so it's not rooted in science. It's a power thing. And then racism, it's not just something that is experienced, interpersonally. That is a form of racism. It's not just something that happens on occasion, like a leap year, we can count on happening every 4 years. It's a system. Racism is internal, right? We hear that internalized oppression or internalized racism. It's interpersonal, so something we experience in relationship with one another. It's structural. I'll say first, it's institutional, right? So the institutions in our country are set up to advantage white folks. And then it's structural, because what we know is that this institutional power is not just exclusive to schools. It's not just exclusive to career. It's all of these, right? It's school systems, it's banking systems, it's higher education systems, it's housing, the housing market. All of these major institutions that play a role in the quality of life for people are all tied together to support and advantage white folks and disadvantage people of color or people of the global majority. And so racism, if you have not experienced it in any one capacity, I'm sure somebody you know has, right? And so if you don't know that it exists, I encourage you to have conversation with people and you'll find out pretty quickly that it's a real thing. So our next term here is whiteness. And again, this is not an attack or an allegation on white folks, right? This is not like the words here, it's not just a reference to skin color, but it's an ideology that is based on beliefs, values, behaviors, habits, attitudes, again, which is intentional about concentrating power. It's about ensuring an unequal distribution of power and privilege based on skin color. But there's all of these things hidden under it, right? All of these underlying factors. And so again, whiteness, what is defined as white, changes over time. And again, I'll use the example of Irish folks early on in this country, right? We're not considered white because that meant power could be more distributed to less people rather than more people until it became convenient. And it's a state of unconsciousness. What this means is that whiteness is so pervasive and yet so invisible. And so for people of color, people of the global majority, whiteness is pervasive. It's everywhere, right? It's the standard of achievement, the gold standard. But for white folks, you hardly have to think of your whiteness, right? For white folks, you don't have to worry about going into a store and being followed. For white folks, you don't have to worry about an interaction with the police. You got a secret armor on, invisible armor. But it's so pervasive because for people of color, for students of color, an interaction with police is a much more different experience. Going into a high-end store, Albuquerque Uptown, you know, that's a different experience. And so it's invisible and pervasive at the same time. And then it's relational. White only exists in relation or opposition to other categories based on this racial hierarchy, right? And so in an example we see in our everyday lives is like mainstream media advertising, like this bottle here. Everyday regular product, right? We don't even give it a second glance. But look at this writing, nourishing lotion for normal to dark skin. And the key word here is normal. So if dark, we know what dark means. If the word, the descriptor there is dark, it doesn't say light at the other end, right? It says normal, implying that the norm, what is right and regular and normal, is the opposite of dark skin or exists on the other end of the spectrum, right, from dark. And so every day we see these explicit and, you know, subliminal messages about whiteness being the standard. Okay, and then, you know, lastly, it's a representative of a position of power, right? So only the people who are defined as white get to define what is whiteness, right? People of the global majority can't just say, well, we take a vote and this is what it means to be white today. This is what qualifies as whiteness today. That racial hierarchy, that racial construct about what race and whiteness is, comes from those in power, which has been white folks in this country. Because we're talking about race, because we're talking about white supremacy culture, we want to be sure that we're all on the same page about what is culture. And so it's all of the things that we can't see, that aren't tangible in people, about how they see the world, right? How they make sense and believe and exist in this world. So early in this, I started by saying, all of my emphasis is Indigenous and Native, because my entire worldview is Coachti. No matter where I go in this world. And so that is my orientation of how to be. My behaviors, my beliefs, my values, my attitudes, all of that come from this way of life. And we all have a culture that we come from, right? We all have a set of values and belief systems that we were given, by our families and communities, or that, we've been able to tweak and adjust and grow into it as we've grown into adults. But culture is extremely, powerful, because it's like the fish in water. We're so ingrained in our culture that it's invisible, right? We don't even see it. We don't think about it. It just is. We're fish in water. And the longer that you are ingrained and embedded, immersed in a culture, the more invisible it becomes. And that's what white supremacy culture is that because this country was founded on genocide, right? Our own history books tell us that settlers got here and tried to do away with the Indians here. Like, that part is not up for debate because it's in the school systems we all went to, probably. But our whole lives, we've been given this whole messages again about whiteness and that being the standard. And so we're all immersed in this culture of white supremacy. All of us, white folks, Black folks, Native folks, Latino folks, we're all immersed in this white supremacy culture, whether we mean to be or not, whether we know it or not. And so we all have a role in dismantling and divesting from it. Because if we're all immersed in it, that means our school systems are immersed in it, right? That means our school leaders are immersed in it. That means the people who make policy about what education is are also immersed in it. And so we have to be explicit about defining it. We have to be unapologetic about saying this is the case and this is how we're going to change it. Because if you're in education in any capacity, right, a teacher, a classroom assistant, a school administrator, a commissioner on the PEC, you're invested in the education of all of our children in New Mexico. And so you have an obligation to ensure that our children in this state are getting an education that honors who they are as human beings and not asks them to leave a part of who they are at the school doors anymore, right? And so to do that, we have to be truthful about white supremacy culture. I'm not going to read this whole definition because it's a lot, but what I will ask is, hopefully you've been reading this while it's been on the screen, but any reflections or anything, is anyone willing to share out anything that stands out to you about this definition of white supremacy culture?
I have something. I think Missy's hand was up also.
Okay.
First, Commissioner White.
Oh, okay, thanks. First of all, Tracy, thanks so much for naming it and for all of that historical context behind it. I was living in Singapore for some time in 1990, And in Singapore, they have three basic skin colors. They have the Chinese, they have the Malay, and they have the East Indians. And it's really interesting when you look at that delineation between the three, which ones were at the top rung of the ladder and which ones were at the bottom of the ladder. It's really interesting how those systems kind of put themselves together based on different factors of within culture. So that's all. Thanks.
Thank you.
And my comment, I'm a geologist by training, and I've heard all of this described as that it's groundwater, right? So you can like fix this pond or you can clean up this river, but this is pervasive. It's the groundwater. So it's just been there. And that was helpful to me in really recognizing the magnitude of it.
Thank you so much.
I have something too. Hi.
Hi.
I just wanted to share, like, even in the smaller scope of it, right? Where even in our own heritage, where grandparents would favor more light-skinned and blue-eyed grandchildren than others, and make them the center of attention and not give any love to the other children. I mean, that's just how when I read this, I thought about in my own family history.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that's true probably for a lot of us, right? But what we don't have the conversations about is, where did that come from? Where did that preference come from? What we know now, like in Coach T, when we think about language revitalization work and our fluent speakers whose children don't speak, we know it's because they experience trauma for speaking. And so we know that that has been a survival tool to not pass down the language, right? And so that's the same with this historical preference in our own communities of color for lighter physical appearance, right? That matches that standard of whiteness, of normal. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. This is just a follow-up to the previous slide. Again, emphasizing we're not talking about white supremacist hate groups. We're talking about a system of oppression, right? A system that is intentionally set up to advantage white folks, and it's everywhere. It's pervasive and it's invisible, but it's definitely here. With the system of white supremacy culture comes these characteristics. And this list of characteristics continues to be, it continues to evolve, right? As we get access to more and more information and knowledge. And so here we see perfectionism, sense of urgency, defensiveness, quantity over quality, worship of the written word, paternalism, power hoarding, fear of open conflict, individualism, progress is bigger or more, objectivity, and right to comfort. And this is a little bit fuzzy. I couldn't make it more clear for some reason, but the way we see these characteristics show up is like perfectionism. Making a mistake equals being a mistake, right? So this idea that it has to be perfect, we can't mess up. And if we do, we're inadequate, right? If we do, it speaks to our intelligence rather than our being like a human being. Sense of urgency, right? We're making decisions and policy and, drawing conclusions because a quick fix, it's more efficient, but it doesn't do anything for long-term solution, right? Doesn't do anything for transformation. Defensiveness, criticism, we see this as criticism as a threat to the power that we hold. And for some of us who've never been in power and now we get a little bit, we just cling to this so tightly. Don't question me. I am the expert. I know what I'm doing. right? But we want to move toward understanding, not, a threat to power. Quantity over quality. And let me just say, at one point, our school, because we have to do so much fundraising, we looked into chartering as an option to be financially stable. We couldn't do it. The state we couldn't do the program we wanted to do because we're Montessori and because we're language immersion, right? And those two things are not line up. They don't line up with state education money. But the other part that was an issue was this idea of quantity over quality, because at our school right now, we have 14 students. And so usually, right, for charter schools, you have to show like a pretty decent number of students. But don't my 14 kiddos deserve the same quality education as a school with 100 kiddos? Don't they still count, even if it's just 7 of them versus 70 of them? They're still somebody's kids. There's still a little tiny human being of innocence who's just trying to make the most out of this world. And so even if there's 7 of them and not 70, don't they deserve money and funding attached to them to have a quality education? But this characteristic of white supremacy culture tells us more is better, bigger is better, more equals quality. And that excludes my little 14 kiddos over here. Paternalism, right? Top-down decision-making. So I'm the expert, I'm the teacher in the classroom, so I know what's best. I'm the principal, so I know what's best. This is important for the position that you all play when schools come to charter, because this can challenge what school leadership model looks like, right? So what this idea of co-principals, of co-administrators built into charter application, and not just one person doing this all. Either or thinking, right? So good or bad, right or wrong, you're for us or against us. No middle ground here. But we should be open to, like, there's more than one right way to do something, right? There's more than one road to get to the same destination. So let's explore them all. Power hoarding. So, I'm in a position of authority, and just because I can make all the decisions myself, should I? Or should I have a conversation or be more inclusive and inviting around decision making? Individualism. This is something that our schools are heavy duty all about. Individual success and achievement. Right? It's how we get a green card, yellow card, red card system, 5 gold stars, these individual ideas of success, and not too much emphasis about when I win, how does everybody else win, right? When I'm successful, how does my community become successful? When I do good in this class, how does our whole class benefit from this? So individualism versus, the group or the community's benefit. Objectivity, again, only one right way to do something that is based in like only logic or facts. And why this is harmful or can be harmful is because it excludes or leaves out like emotion and feelings. Right. And now, because of the pandemic, there's huge emphasis on social emotional learning. But if we say be objective, what about that emotion? What about the feelings that our students come to school with, that our teachers and school leaders come to school with? Right. And the important thing here is that the way people feel dictates the way they behave. The way people feel dictates the action I take. And so in our school systems, if there's intentional time and space to be reflective about how am I stepping into my day as a teacher, I had a hard time last night. My kids are sick. I had to do everything at home. My husband is away from work, whatever that is, I'm having a hard day. So let me just take a breather now that I finally made it in the door, you know, versus I'm here, got to get things done. It's crazy. So anyway, just being intentional about being inclusive of people's emotions and feelings. Okay, and this right to comfort is like, you know, it says here, scapegoating those causing discomfort. This is the idea that when somebody says something like out there that is blatantly offensive, or maybe it's a microaggression and it's a dig at me, but it's not explicit, right? But I can feel it's there. Because it's so uncomfortable, because it makes me feel bad and embarrassed, I don't address the person saying or doing these harmful things. I take on the discomfort and keep the meeting moving, right? So for example, you know, after the whole publication, the journal articles about LESC director Rachel Grudgel, right, came on with those comments she made. Right after that, I was asked to sit on a panel where legislators were talking about equity. We're talking about anti-racist education. And nobody addressed those comments. Nobody said, you know, we don't know if it's true or not, but we don't support that kind of leadership, period, right? But they talked about how wonderful this LESC work was going, right? How LESC was doing such a good job without acknowledging that the director is, you know, has this article put out about her. And then I was supposed to answer a question about anti-racism and equity right after that. That was uncomfortable for me. That was uncomfortable for me to know that this person you're praising just referred to talking to Native students through smoke signals. And I'm just going to be uncomfortable and let, you know, and so for me, I had to divest from this characteristic of white to comfort and say, you know, I appreciate if this has been your experience, but from what I know, and you all haven't said anything otherwise, it seems quite harmful that somebody with this perspective is leading education policy. And so that's not an attack, right? But that's also letting you know that what is happening here is harmful, is offensive, is uncomfortable for me. And so that's a personal experience. But our system is set up to do this whole thing. It's why we don't have conversation about race and racism in our schools, in our workplaces, right? It's why it's taboo to say white supremacy and have everybody freak out, right? So we just went through this pretty big list. Maybe it was intense for some of us, but I'm gonna ask you all to just spend just a few minutes personal reflection, thinking about that list, and maybe you have an idea of what might be missing from those characteristics. If you can think about, if you had to, which of those characteristics could you divest from, right? Let go of, relinquish that way of thinking. Which of those characteristics might be most challenging? For me, I'll tell you, it's this idea of sense of urgency, because I want things done now, because we have to spend funding by this time, because the deadline is this time. And so it's so much more efficient for me to just, let me just do this real quick. I'll make this decision and swing back to it later, instead of taking time with the team and the people and to be thorough. And then any ideas about thinking how you would support one another in the capacity you're all in, to working around divesting from, dismantling these white supremacy culture characteristics. So I'm going to put this, I'll put this list back up here and just give you a minute to look it over. And then in a minute or two, I'll ask if anybody is just willing to share which of these would be the easiest to divest from, which of these would be the hardest to let go of, And maybe just anything that came up for you.
Tracy, would it make any practical sense, just so like maybe if to increase engagement and participation, because I know the charter school division staff is with us. I think we have about 20, maybe 30 participants total, to break us into smaller groups and then do report outs or something?
Yeah,
Commissioner, I'm sorry, Commissioner, it's not set up for us to be able to go into breakouts in a webinar. I've been searching to see if I have that ability, and I don't see it as an option.
All right, just a thought.
Yeah, no, I was already there, but I don't see a way to break people out. Maybe if I moved all the attendees to panelists, but I don't see any option to break everybody out. I'm sorry.
that's fine. We usually like to do breakout discussions here, but it's been my experience too that in this type of format, you can't do that. Okay.
Could you show the list again?
Mm-hmm. So here's, sorry about that. Okay. So here's the list right on the left-hand side. We're talking about divesting from these characteristics. And when we divest from this, we do that by looking more like this brown middle column, right? So defensiveness, instead of it being a threat to power, it's looking for, people are curious, it's looking for understanding, right? So that's where the questions are coming from, somebody wanting to know. Perfectionism, we divest from that by staying engaged in the process, seeing it through and embracing mistakes along the way. Right to comfort, we divest from that by welcoming discomfort, by saying this is going to be hard and uncomfortable, but I'm going to sit here and engage in it still. So just take a second. And then again, I'm asking which of these might be the hardest to relinquish, which of these might be the easiest to say, yeah, I can start checking myself on that tomorrow, right? Or when I look through charter applications, I can reframe my mindset to figure out how it looks like this, brown column. Whenever anyone is ready to share, we will gladly hear it.
Tracy, I know one of the things I also saw you say was what might be missing. And I remember when I was a teacher, one of the things that I had learned that really opened my eyes to what is the whiteness in schools versus what is part of people's culture is, and I don't know how else to say it besides like eye contact and like confidence through eye contact. That's very much like a white school culture. And that was something that I learned, when you have students and they don't look at you, that's actually part of their culture growing up. Like they're not being disrespectful. They're not being, they're not losing their confidence because they do that. It's actually part of how they grew up. And so as a teacher to say, hey, look at me when I'm talking to you, that's a really normal thing for you to hear in schools is, hey, I need you to look at me when I'm talking to you. It's actually it goes against what they've been raised to do and by their family's culture and by their community's culture. And so I was trying to like figure out maybe it might fit in there somewhere, but that was something that was like, it seemed like such a small thing that I kind of took for granted as a white teacher, growing up in a place where, my mom told me, hey, look at me when I'm talking to you. And then to have students whose community was like, hey, you do not look directly into people's eyes when you're speaking to them. That's disrespectful. So I think that's kind of one of the simple measures of this. I feel like these characteristics can feel like really holistic and a little bit more like just in the air. But I think you can bring these things down to like very actionable items that teachers and students engage with on a daily basis, where students are having to figure out, okay, well, which culture do I need to betray in order to, figure out the right way to do it in school.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. That's this definition of respect, right? Even what respect is defined from this white supremacy culture. That exact example that you shared is that. Anybody else want to share what came up for you?
Well, I think for me, this is really helpful because we're actually looking at changing how we look at new applications and trying to, not fit everyone into a box, and recognizing the importance of that individualism, and that there's just not one right way to do it. And how do we do that as the authorizer, being able to recognize that and offer that respect for that? That's a really important conversation that we're trying to incorporate into those processes now. And it's hard. And it's hard to me. It's hard to change the culture of what it had been, and almost, you look at that. It's it's one way or the right way, and not having people say, well, now you think that's the right way, and how do you deal with that conflict that develops because we're changing how we looked at things. And I guess getting people to recognize that there was error in that, there was, and it's profoundly difficult.
For sure.
Yeah, Tracy, could you go back to that other list with the thanks? What came up for me was that sense of urgency, because it seems that in school systems, there's always this sense that something has to be down on paper, the data has to be there before we can measure a school, or before we can look at what makes a successful school, or what makes, those types of measurements are just easy outs as far as and they don't really cultivate a generation. They're there for the public to say, oh, that's a great school, they had an A or whatever. But I think those types of measurements are easy outs and convey into the sense of urgency. And I love how this, it shows up in the way that we test, in our adherence to whatever curriculum is being used, into what we say is proficient or not proficient. So that's what comes up. And as an authorizer and school administrator, this is something that I want to rattle, because I know that there are other ways of knowing how students learn, and communities can inform that. So, next.
Thank you so much. I see your hand, Commissioner Michael Chavez. I just want to acknowledge everything that's been shared to this point, and just say, so when we think about the right way, when we think about the right way of doing things in this state, there's already been a couple of acknowledgements that the current system doesn't serve us all the way it's supposed to, right? One is the fact that you all exist and charter schools are an option. And so when people apply, they're already saying the standard public education system and way of educating isn't working. And so we're applying to do it differently, right? The other piece that is new is the Yazzie Martinez legal decision that acknowledges this is not working for these groups of students. And so when we think about charter applications and we're talking about what is the right way, the bottom line is the right way for who, right? When we talk about effectiveness and achievement and success, the bottom line question is according to who, right? And so for our school, when we think about success and achievement, good grades, A+, 4.0, sure, that's important, but our kids have to be fluent to survive in Cochiti, right? They have to be fluent to thrive in our everyday life, not just Monday through Friday from 7:30 to 3:30, 24 hours a day, they need our language to thrive. And so success for us is, sure, I can get into college and I can speak my language. So the right way, according to who, right? Success and achievement, according to who? School in service to what? And so Commissioner Michael Chavez.
Thank you, Tracy. I got to be honest with you and let you know that in this short amount of time, or just under an hour, I believe, I have had this internal battle that had been stretched from one side to the other, because I have agreed with you on several things that you've said. And I've said, yes, right on, and then other things I've said, oh, no, no, that's no. And so I just want to commend you for the courage that you have to just put this out there like this, because it does. I'm hoping that that's one of the goals, was to stretch people, to get them to think, to look at themselves and everything like that. And but I am struggling. I'm going to tell you right now, I am struggling with some of this, because for most of my career, I have been focused on equity. I've been focused on the importance of language and how that influences culture and vice versa, and having that multicultural piece, but also looking at inequities, social stratification, and all those pieces, right? And trying to make sense of them into the different leadership positions that I have held. And I've shared my story on many times, where I talk about the struggles and the barriers that I have faced in trying to get people to see something different, and trying to get people to value the culture and the language that different peoples come from, and how that may relate or not relate to the accountability system and that sort of thing. And so I'm with you in that regard. On the flip side is, over the course of my career and working in and out of this arena, I've also found that there's different ways to approach things. And one of the things that I kind of settled on is, you've got a system, like you said. I get it. I don't necessarily agree that it's all white, and it has that negative impact. It was very intentional to keep people down. I don't necessarily agree with that. However, I can see where you're coming from with that. But I also know that, just like you've talked about your kids and your pueblo and the culture in which they come from, and knowing how to survive within that environment, there's also an environment outside of that. And it's this bigger system that what you're talking about. And I think the perspective that I've always have taken is value who you are, value where you come from, and that sort of thing. But also understand that there is another system, if you will, that you have to recognize and you have to work under in order to be successful, whether you agree with it or not, whether because here's the thing, and this is my struggle, is what do you say to, as you're Native American, I am of Hispanic or Latino, whatever you want to call it, and that's the other thing. We label ourselves with all these different names and everything like that. But so however you identify yourself, what do you say to those people that come from those groups that have been successful, that have entered into that system that have been successful? Because as my ancestor, my grandparents, they came up from Mexico, it was with that idea of a better way of life, of success, the American dream, if you will, whether that's white or not, right? It's chasing that better way of life, and they looked at it as opportunity. And so every generation takes a little bit more, and in the form of language, or even college graduate. I saw some statistics way back when that said it takes 3 generations to produce your first college graduate, at least 3 generations. And so, it is a process. There is a working that has to happen, but I guess the struggle is just understanding that, everything that you've talked about, recognizing it. And you know what, the historical piece, it's absolutely important. We've got to understand, those pieces. I get it. But I also think that, okay, we've got to recognize it, but don't get hung up on it either. We've got to move on beyond it. And so what are the steps that we need to take? So like what Glenna was saying about, the different groups of people that she was exposed to. Where was it? In Singapore, Glenna? Yeah. I'm just going to look at the Hispanic culture, right? Okay, the Hispanic culture, even within the Hispanic culture, and I'm going to guess that there's either other subgroup, other ethnicities, other, that discriminate against their own people. So even within that group, there is that discrimination that happens, whether it's the color of your skin or whether it's, for me, as a Hispanic male, sometimes I've been told that I'm not Mexican enough because my language is not strong enough in Spanish, and yet I'm not white enough because I'm not totally, I'm not at the same level. So I understand it, but even within our cultures, our own people, we have those barriers. We put ourselves in those boxes, if you will. And that's something that we've got to address. I know in Native American, I've got several really good friends that are Native American. They talk about the same thing, amongst the native people. And so this is so much bigger than just us saying, okay, this is white or this is not white, right? It goes so much bigger than that. And so I know I'm talking a lot, but holy cow, it's just, you've really stirred up a lot in this short amount of time in this presentation. So I just needed to share that. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate everything that you shared, because that is the point of doing anti-racist work. Let's talk about it, right? And these racism has been perpetuated on and again because we don't have conversations like this. As soon as it's racism, right, it's a conflict. But I can understand where you're coming from, because in my community, we have those ways of discriminating against each other here, right? I can understand where you're coming from, where in some cases I'm not Native enough, but I don't fit into mainstream society enough. I'm exactly what you said. I'm one of the people that this public education as a Coach T woman has worked for. I have a master's in business administration from Syracuse University, right? For me, that was like as white as it got. Every group I was in, I was the only person of color there. And I graduated with a degree, just like, the 7 other white men in my group did. And so I get everything you're saying. And the only thing that we are trying to emphasize and make sure is that I don't have to choose between being successful in Coach T or being successful in this world that exists outside of Coach T. It is 2021. People are finding space for fun. Surely there's a way for our school systems to honor everyone's identity so that they thrive in my homelands. And then when I go to Bernalillo to get groceries, I got no issue, right? So when I go to university at Syracuse, I've got no issue because I know who I am and I didn't have to give up a part of myself to get there anymore. So I totally hear you. I totally can share that place that you're coming from, because I fall right in line with a lot of what you shared personally. And so it's just important that we have these conversations. What is our school system doing to ensure that students have this conversation, that school leaders have these conversations with their students, right? So thank you for this.
Tracy, let me just, if I could just add to that, it's also a slippery slope in many ways. Because when you come from that one perspective, that one lens that, especially in this perspective of this being white supremacy, and you're coming from that perspective, you're coming from, you know, it's a slippery slope in that you could start get people to think that, okay, hey, you know, it's all about me, it's all about who I am, it's all about my culture, it's all about, you know, that sort of thing. And that's what starts to cause divisiveness. And I think we've had enough divisiveness, you know, to last us a lifetime, right? But what we need to do is what you were talking about, is learn how to come together and be one people, one working together, still hold on to our identity, but also know that beyond that, you know, we should all be inclusive of each other and respect each other and where we come from. I totally agree with you 100% on that, but it's that slippery slope that I'm going to say that it's almost, it could almost be, and I know some people argue with me on this and they say reverse discrimination doesn't exist. But actually, I believe it does, because I do believe that it could go to that extreme on the other end. And so anyways, my 2 cents.
Thank you. We can hear from Commissioner Mike Taylor, and then if it's okay, we can move on for the sake of time.
Okay, yeah, I'll try to keep this brief. Thank you very much for your presentation, Tracy. A question I have is, so much of what I guess growing up, so much of what I thought and what I think and how I respond and so forth is just from my surroundings, right? I am so open to being a person that has zero racism in my body. You know, some of the things I have found myself saying over the course of my lifetime, when I was younger especially, were just sort of ingrained in me, you know, things that my parents might say and that I would never say at this point. You know, I'd never respond at that point. So it's obviously a process of learning and being exposed, and I'm sure that we're all open for those, you know, for those opportunities to learn and be more sensitive, you know. And so my question is this, and excuse my ignorance if it offends anybody, I'm not trying to do that, but I sometimes feel like, for instance, you know, we recognize people for their accomplishments by saying things like, this is the first Black American to do this, or this is the first Native American person to do this. To me, I think throwing that descriptive adjective, or you know, saying this is the first Black person to do this, immediately in my mind creates a division, because it's like, why can't we just focus on the fact that this person is a person and look at the accomplishment that this person did? Do you think that is that ignorance on my part, or is that something that I need to do better at and learn how to receive that, or what?
Thank you for that. And that brings me back to this either or thinking, right? Because of the system of white supremacy culture, it is important, very important, to recognize and honor people of color who have broke through these power hoarding situations, right? And so that's the reason why there's the first Black whatever, the first Native whatever, even outside of race, right? The first female X, Y, and Z, right? Is because white men in this country are at the top of the food chain. And so sometimes there's like the first female to break through something that has been male dominated. And so we're moving away from this either or thinking, and we're saying, congratulations on being the first Native woman to do this. Why has it taken so long for a female Native to be in this position, right? So that follow-up question. So for example, in Montessori, just a couple of years ago, they had their 100th birthday, right? So Montessori had been an established education around the world for for 100 years. And in Montessori, there's trainer of the teachers, right? The training certification to become a teacher. Well, just a couple of years ago, maybe Montessori was 102 years old, they had their first Black trainer of teachers. And so in Montessori, it's supposed to be an education for global life. And up until 2 years ago, there had never been a Black person as a trainer. And so congratulations, Nia Seal, on being the first Black woman. But why did it take Montessori 102 years to have a Black person as a trainer? And so it's both. We want to acknowledge and recognize someone's accomplishment. And then we want to look at the system, the environment that had not been accessible to people of color before this point. And that it's important, and it goes back to what was shared by Commissioner Chavez. We don't put ourselves in this box, right? It's not us identifying this, because when I apply for a loan, why do I have to check my race then? When I apply for healthcare, why do I have to check a box? So I don't choose this. The system makes us identify. And depending on what box I check, I might get lower health insurance, right? That's a point for me. Depending on what box I check, I might get more points so that I get a lower interest rate, because that's the system, the data for our society, right? Gives points to those boxes. So we're moving away from either or thinking, and we're saying, yeah, congratulations. And how come it took this long? What about this area has been inaccessible for people of color, right? And then again, we're not self-identifying because we just want to walk around holding a sign saying I'm Native, I'm Native. No, these things that influence my quality of life require me to check a box. My car loan, my house loan, my college application, my scholarships, right? All of those things. Thank you. I hope that answer was helpful. I'm going to go through this just quickly because I want to be able to share with you the information that came explicitly from Dr. Swina. So we're going to look at these next 3 terms. In our school systems, these are usually how people are defined in these 3 different approaches, right? So there's the deficit approach. Students, family, communities, languages, literacies, histories, and cultural ways are a deficit. For Native American people in this country, there's an entire era of policy that said, kill the Indian, save the man. Right? Boarding school era, kill the Indian, save the man. Deficit approach, that means we'll accept the physical human form, but not the language, not the way they dress, not the way they physically present themselves, not the belief system, right? Catholicism came and did the same thing to the tribes. We'll accept you as people, as human beings, but you better change what you believe in because it's not right. Okay, so deficit approach. The difference approach is an acknowledgement that, yeah, you're different, and but this is still the right way, right? This white middle class idea, way of being. So difference approach is like, yeah, your language is different, and that's cool, but this is still the right way. So we're not going to do anything to hurt it, but we're not going to do anything to nurture it either. And you should still try to speak English as proficiently as possible. And then here's the strength or asset approach, right? So students, families, communities, languages, cultural ways are seen as a strength or an asset that should be sustained as students build understandings of power and are invited into critical proficiency in dominant cultural ways. And the goal here is like transformation. And so there's no reason why in our state, like we shouldn't have more dual language programs, right? We spend a whole lot of money on English language learners, pulling out students who need to skip science because they need to practice English. But at home, outside of school, even in their job now, all they might speak is Spanish. So why can't they come to school in Spanish, right? Why can't they learn math and science and literacy in Spanish? And that's something that will sustain their own way of life and look good in our resumes, right? It's like, how do I come from a home place that speaks another language? And then if I go to school with fluency from pre-K up until high school, that's being tutored out of me. And then I get to high school where I'm required to learn another language to graduate. Are you kidding me? You know, let's figure it out. Let's figure out a way to sustain and nurture and honor the languages and the beliefs that we all come from, because there's more than one way to do things. Damage-centered education, it's intent on portraying communities of color as defeated and broken. One of the ways this happens is by constant, continuous documentation of pain or loss. And so a lot of times when we think of or hear of communities of color, we hear words like for Native communities, language loss. In general, communities of color, poverty, below the poverty line, access to federal resources, or substance or mental health issues, right? So that documentation of pain or loss. For desired-based education, when our school systems are rooted in desired-based, it's accounting for the loss and despair, but also like all of the strengths and resources and expertise and knowledge that exists in our communities too. So for Native communities, yeah, there's language loss, but there was a whole lot of federal policy that said, don't you dare speak your language before we lost language, right? Yeah, there's health disparity issues, but there's a whole era of federal government policy that says it's okay to take our land and our natural resources, our food sustenance sources. And so now we have commodities, right? Now, and you think of like food disparities anyway, right? And our access to organic and natural food, all of that is like system, right? That's the system of it all. And so let me just ask you for 3 minutes to look at these two questions. Take a moment to jot down or just think about how your own racial identity, whatever it is that you identify as, when you go to the bank for a loan or health insurance, what box do you check? Think about that racial identity and the community that you come from, and how was it positioned in your own education? Right? How did you see yourselves and the people that you come from in your own education? So I'll ask for anybody's quick share out in 2 minutes.
I'll share if I think I understand. So white, dominant would be where I'm coming from. What I was brought up in, been working hard to break that down.
I have an experience that that because I'm Asian, Harvard offered me a paid PhD and with a stipend, and I turned them down because of the reason they offered it to me. It was a little tempting, but I did turn them down, and it made me feel tokenized. And I have many situations about being Asian, but I was raised white. My parents were Anglo, and so being upper middle class Anglo family, there's been a lot of identity work that I've done throughout my life. But that education, affirmative action, tokenization of being Asian was, and I don't regret it either. I don't regret turning them down.
So this is where I get conflicted, because growing up, I had difficulties with, and people are going to find this hard, I look lily white and that racial identity. I grew up in a community that was very white, but I had a family on one side of my family who never believed that I was white enough, because I've got African American and Native American and Hispanic deeply rooted in my culture. I didn't pop out with a lot of those characteristics, but I had a grandfather who never spoke to me because I wasn't white enough. So I had the benefit to a great extent of growing up in that white community, but I had difficulty in identifying with really any racial group, but I've certainly benefited from, the boxes I've checked, but conflicted every time I check them.
And I'll just share, I think that my history is common amongst people in my generation. And that is that up until my generation, my family spoke Spanish. My parents and my grandparents were bilingual, but somehow they got the message that speaking Spanish was not a path to success. So I remember as a child being with my great grandmothers, and I knew two of them that lived to be 92 years old, and they didn't speak English and I didn't speak Spanish. So there needed to be another adult present to translate when I was around them. And I think that's a huge tragedy. But I remember my great uncle telling a story, and he was a storyteller. Just remembering when he was in elementary school and being in the playground, speaking Spanish with some of his peers and being spanked for it. So I think that led my parents to believe that they weren't going to teach us Spanish, and instead they'd talk about us in Spanish, which motivated me to study in Mexico and learn the language anyway.
Thank you so much, everybody. And I know we all have different life experiences that can either, what was shared earlier, support what we're talking about or totally oppose what we're talking about. But the important thing again is that we're talking about it. And I can understand where you're coming from, and you can understand where I'm coming from. And how do we systematize a sense of understanding? Right? That's what anti-racist work is. Because these next two slides are just another way of emphasizing what I have been saying all along, is that I'm not talking about white folks individually, right? I'm not accusing white folks, anybody who checks the white box on an application. I'm not accusing you of being racist. I'm not accusing you of being tied in with a sense or with a hate group. We're talking about a system that prioritizes your racial identity of white or the presentation of whiteness over people of color, along with all these other things that our society gives a little bonus point to, right? So if you're a citizen, if you're white, if you're cis male, right, born and identify as a male. If your first language is English, this idea of the American dream, right? Being married with children, and you own your own white picket fence property, all of these things, this religious belief of Christianity, college education. It's why we pay more, right, for a college education rather than a high school diploma, just on a generic pay scale. So along with whiteness, we know that our society prioritizes privileges all of these identities. But a lot of times we talk about equality and we talk about equity. What is not inherent in equity is anti-racism, right? So being anti-racist and being equitable are two different things. To ensure equity, you also have to be anti-racist. Two different things. And so that's why we highly stress focusing on like white supremacy culture and racial identity when we talk about anti-racist work and not just equity work, right? That's why we're explicit about saying anti-racist. And this isn't an equity training about equitable approaches to education. This is anti-racist approaches to education. So here, just again, to emphasize how our society prioritizes and concentrates power with those identities inside the small gray box. So prioritizes, privileges, and concentrates power within those identities in that middle gray box. That means if you identify, with the identities in the white font, in the big black box, that means you probably have a few more hoops to jump through than someone who is the identities in the middle box, right? Your route to get somewhere is just a little bit longer if you carry one of these identities outside of that gray box. And then re-emphasizing that because you're on the Public Education Commission, that's an acknowledgement that you believe that there has to be another option for folks, right, than the standard public education system. Like folks should have the right to have options in education. And to be solution focused with regard to education, and again, emphasizing Indigenous education in this example here, we can be solution focused without blaming, and we can be solution focused and still acknowledging the historical traumas and policies that have got us to education, got education to where it's at today. And so for our school, for Indigenous education, for our teacher training program, for our anti-racist training, we have to consider all of this. And we can't just say, be nice to people, we're all human beings. Because the box I check again doesn't give me that option to check human being or alien, right? Human being or animal. And so now my interest rate is lower. No, I have to check a racial identity. And so when we think about school, here is all of the policies that have influenced how school came to be what it is. And so probably all of our communities have their own set of legislation, right, that influence what school is supposed to be. We do anti-racist in education so that nobody has to have an experience like our dear, dear, dear Dr. Joseph Henry Sweeney had to have growing up. These are little excerpts from his essay called "And Then I Went to School." If you haven't had a chance to read it, please do. That's anti-racist training in 7 pages. And it's you can feel it too. So I'll just go through a couple of these quickly. I learned to appreciate cooperation in nature with my fellow men early in life. I felt very much a part of the world. Okay, he didn't say I felt very much a part of my community of Coachiti. He said this world that Coachiti exists in, and so does everything else, right? I felt very much a part of the world and our way of life. I knew I had a place in it and felt good about me. And then I went to school. right? And then I went to school. And then this next sentence talks about his grandmother and the teacher, right? The expert who was supposed to be there for his best interest looks nothing like my grandma. That speaks to school leadership, right? That speaks to who are the teachers engaging with our students. Do they look like them? Do they come from the communities they come from? And then this idea of what is achievement. I spoke this language. She couldn't understand anything I was saying. So was she really smart? Was she the expert if she couldn't understand my language? Or am I the dumb one because I can't understand her language? Right? So this idea of success, of what it means to achieve. And then this last bullet is like physical description of the classroom, right? For Dr. Swina, it reminded him of something traumatizing, the clinic here in the village. There was nothing warm and comfy and cozy and nurturing about our school classrooms. So how do we make our students feel this is a safe place to learn something new today? He talks again about the painful experience of school. He talked about how not only did he have to learn this new English language, but this new set of values that come with it, right? So these ideas of respect, these ideas of responsibility that differs from what I know to be, what I know to be. The other thing he says, I couldn't understand too much what was happening, but what was always clear to me was when I messed up, was when I wasn't good enough, was when I wasn't understanding. So I didn't get the science lesson today, but I sure figured out that I didn't know what was going on, right? Those negative messages being clearly communicated. And then this effort to make sense of both worlds together was so painful, but I had to do it. This is talking about some of us don't survive the public school system, and are successful because we enjoyed it and it's relatable. We had to do it to survive. And so school shouldn't be like that for anyone, right? School should nurture us to thrive. And then this next one, mixed messages about if at home they're telling me this is what's good for me, but then I go to school and it totally contradicts everything I know and the way I speak and believe, but they're also saying that's good for me. Man, that's confusing. How could both of these things be in my best interest and polar opposites? Right? Polar ideas of what's good and bad. And then, again, there was no choice left but to compete with the white man on his terms for survival. And to do that, I had to give up part of my life. So that goes back to that same idea, like, yeah, I should be able to thrive in Coach T, and I should be able to thrive at Syracuse University. But I shouldn't have to give up either part of myself or any part of myself to do so, right? Our school systems, our teachers, our school administrators, our policies, our funding, by now in 2021, have the capacity to nurture students to thrive wherever they're at, wherever they come from. And so these next few slides are what we're going to wrap up with. And these are examples of approaches to anti-racist education. So these are strategies for doing anti-racist work, anti-racist education. And these are based on our way of life. And so they could look different or not exist, right? Depending on where you come from, but it's a different way of approaching education. And so the key is to find the elements, the commonalities, and ensure that there's space for them to exist in schools everywhere. So elder focused versus youth focused. So for a school like ours, where it's language immersion, language revitalization, we know that our elders are the holders of the language, are the knowledge holders, are the, have the wisdom to share with us. And so we want to center them in our education, not just have a grandparent visit the classroom, but everything we do is guided from their life experience. Everything we do is based on the idea that they're the experts, right? In Coach T history, in Coach T tribal government that has had to negotiate with the federal government since its existence, right? So our elders are a strategy for us to do anti-racist, because what also comes with our elders is not this, like, we're never told here, you have to be anti-racist. We don't grow up with that kind of saying, right, in the household. But what we do grow up with is these ideas of respect and responsibility and ideas of kindness. And I don't think anybody grows up with parents and communities and elders that say, you respect everybody except for so-and-so, right? You be respectful of everybody except them, and them. You be kind to everybody except them, and them. No, it's usually be respectful, be kind, not excluding anybody from that. This other piece is, let's see here. This other idea is that traditions are important. And remember, these are all tied to who is the school in service to? The right way according to who, right? Success and achievement according to who? And so traditions are important. Doing things as they've been done before because they come with very intentional purpose, right? Intention and specific purpose, rather than change is important. This is one of the reasons why we use Montessori pedagogy, because in Montessori pedagogy, we don't have, history books, edition 1 through 11, right? We don't have to buy the textbook over and over again because they changed a few words, because some new information came out. Montessori, the curricula itself is tailored to the community, and it intentionally describes how it interacts outside of that, with the rest of the world. And so keeping in mind that what is right according to who, success and achievement, school and service to what or who, traditions are important. Understanding the reason, the intention, the purposes behind protocol and process. This idea that education is everyone's responsibility. Everyone has something to benefit when we all have access to an education that is meaningful to our own way of life, rather than leaving it to the expert. Again, one teacher, one administrator, one principal who has this hierarchy of expertise and qualification. Moving away from that and saying everybody has something to offer, and we're going to find a way to use your strength and plug it into this system here. This is tied to the characteristic of individualism versus the whole group, right? So education, or this strategy, speaks to providing an educational experience that reminds us all that we have a responsibility to give back to our communities. That not only do I need to succeed, but I need to contribute to the people and the community that I come from. And not just, I get better and I'm out of here. Or I get better and now, I'm successful and I'm living in a way that only I benefit from. Of course, those are nice. And of course, there's a boundary, right? We're not saying I get my paycheck and then I turn it over to a whole Coach T every 2 weeks. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that what are the ways that when I'm successful, I'm still obligated to show up for my community, right? I'm still obligated as a student to show up for the peers in my classroom. Education that is an experience for children in the context of real life. So in this trip, our kids are getting a language lesson, they're getting physical education on this hike, and they're doing science, they're doing botany. All in one field trip. And they're getting the cultural understanding, the cultural significance of why we engage with this area in our land in this way. So all of it, and it's not on YouTube, right? It's not in a textbook. It's not on the internet. They're living it. They're feeling it. They're tasting it. They're hearing it. All of it. And so with that, creating educational experiences that are all of these in a cohesive, comprehensive way. That when we do basket weaving, that's integrating social emotional wellness, that's integrating mathematics and science, versus 45 minutes we're talking about science, 45 minutes we're talking about English literacy, 45 minutes we're talking about math. There's a lot that exists in our environments where we could get a 2-for-1 special, 3-for-1 special in this one lesson. We don't have to break it up like that. The caption here is songs, or strategy is songs, stories, and dances specific to a group, versus this one size fits all. And so how in our educational systems, in our educational models, are we making space for students to learn and take in information and knowledge in a way that makes the most sense to them, in a way that is most meaningful to the way of life that they already come from? And when I say like songs, stories, dances specific to groups versus the Eurocentric generic, just think about, in high school, we all had to read like Shakespeare, right? We all had to read about these sort of European-based arts, and way of expressing emotion and yourself. When we already have those things too, right? All of our cultures come with these things too. So it doesn't just have to be my way, but it doesn't just have to be Shakespeare either, right? Options. And then spirituality versus separation of church and state. So let me be explicit here. This says spirituality, not any one specific religion. So I'm not advocating or suggesting or going back to say we have to have God or Catholicism or Christianity in school. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that students, whatever they believe in, can come to school and know that they don't have to leave that at the door. They don't have to come to school and be made to feel like, what I believe in is wrong. The way I see the world and my faith system is inadequate. And so this can be done in, through grounding, through meditation, through an opening blessing, through, however that looks, but just an acknowledgement that what keeps me grounded is different than what keeps you grounded, and that's okay. And that's okay. And so for a school like us, who, I shared with you all that we looked into chartering as a way to be financially stable. We were going to be in Cochiti Pueblo on tribal land, right? Cochiti tribal land. And on the charter application, there was no acknowledgement of tribal land or tribal approval to put a school on tribal land. And so as a person who is strong about tribal sovereignty, there was no way it was going to be okay with me to open, a school that was approved at the state level without an acknowledgement of tribal approval to do so. The other part was that Montessori, right? So this Montessori approach that allowed our language, our heritage language, to exist naturally as it does in our way of life is not something that the state recognizes as a legitimate education model, right? So all of our credentialed diplomaed Montessori teachers who don't have like the state teaching requirements, they wouldn't be qualified as teachers under the state. And then just because it's Montessori, we didn't qualify anyway, but specific to the teachers, they wouldn't be legitimate teachers. The other part of that is that language immersion, right? Part of tribal sovereignty says that it's our inherent right as tribal people to govern our lives in terms of health, education, law, and order. And so if our tribal government, our council says it is in the best interest to do immersion, to teach these kids only in Keres because English is everywhere and they're going to pick it up no matter what, that's the kind of school that we want. But because we're doing it in Keres and we took state money, it would make it, a public school where anybody could come. But for us, our language is the intellectual property of our tribe, right? It was only meant for us. Otherwise, it'd be in Rosetta Stone, it'll be on the internet. But it was given to us for a very specific purpose. And so it doesn't just belong to anybody. But our children, who are parents who choose Montessori, are parents who choose language revitalization and respect for tribal sovereignty with regard to our language, they don't get public education money to get this education that is most meaningful, right? That is most effective to their way of life. And so we didn't charter because we didn't want to give up Montessori and we didn't want to give up our language. And we didn't want to disobey, disrespect, disregard tribal sovereignty that tells us our language is our intellectual property. And so we can't just give it to whoever comes in the door. And so taking everything that I shared with you all, sharing why we couldn't charter, this is just an example of, we're not the best for anti-racist education. We're not the best educational model. My point in sharing all of this and my point in sharing this school mission is that we are an option. And anti-racist education should provide options. It should provide options for doing education in multiple right ways. Right? The idea that there is more than one way to do schooling. And so for us, when we do that by striving to reclaim our children's education and honor our heritage, right? So again, that idea of not having to give up any part of ourselves, we can have a strong Western education and honor our heritage and language and way of life by using a comprehensive cultural and academic curriculum to assist families. And for me, I always say this is such a big word, assist families, because this speaks to the strength-based approach. The idea that our families already come with enough know-how and knowledge and desire. They just need an educational option that continues to nurture that for them, that helps them do what they're already doing and wanting, right? So we're assisting families in nurturing, Keres speaking, holistically healthy, community-minded, and academically strong students. So that's the end of my presentation. I just again want to emphasize, I know I said white supremacy culture a lot. That's not an attack, an accusation, an allegation against white folks individually or just as a group, right? I'm not talking about hate groups or white supremacy as hate groups. I'm talking about a system that asks you to check that box. And when you do, you benefit from it. I'm talking about a system that asks you to check a box. And if it's not white, it's a little bit harder, right? It's a few more hoops to jump through. And then again, you know, we're not the best. I'm not saying do it all like us because we know exactly, you know, how to do everything. I'm saying we're an option. And we all deserve options. All of our children deserve, should have the right to an education that is meaningful to their entire way of life, not just their student way of life, not just according to our school report card way of life, right? That makes my school look good, but me too, as a parent, as a student. And that's it. Thank you so much. I'll take any questions or comments.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. I just have a quick question. So are you going to share this presentation with us or with Karina so that she can share it with all of us? Is there a way we could get a copy of this?
I can ask. Part of what I shared is proprietary information that we use in our teacher training.
Right.
And so I'll talk with my team about what pieces I can share out freely, and I'll do that.
Okay.
Well, we are recording this, so there's no concern with someone accessing the record. Tracy, I'm just double checking because the recording will be on, you know, for public access.
No, that's fine.
Okay, great.
That's fine.
Super. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you, Glenna.
Yeah, really, thank you. I keep reflecting back to that, you know, that discomfort part, and I appreciate the discomfort being created. So, so thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Tracy. I wanted to just share too, you know, the discomfort part, because as a female Hispanic woman too, I have to wake up every morning and tell myself every day to try to focus on microaggressions and you know, even sexual sexism that was built into my upbringing. So this really, you know, kind of brought it home, and I just think that gosh, your training should be out there for everybody. This was just so helpful, and I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate Glenna for having you reaching out to you and letting us know that you exist, and what you're doing on the Cochiti Reservation is just spectacular. So thank you so much. I really appreciate everything you're doing.
Thank you, Commissioner Amijo. Appreciate it.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions or comments, Tracy, really, I appreciate this, and I know I'm going to go back and look at it again and again to pick up more pieces. So I truly do appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
You too.
Thanks, Tracy. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
So,
Bye.
Commissioners, we don't have a lot on the work session agenda. So I'm going to suggest, I know I need a short break, but could we take like just a 15-minute break, and then we should be able to come back and knock this out pretty quickly.
That sounds good to me.
Are we good with that? Okay, so it is.
Probably 20 to run and pick up food and come back.
I'm sorry, I
said
didn't hear
I'm gonna
that.
need probably 20 to run and pick up food and come back. So I'm just letting you
Okay.
know, if you start in 15, I won't be here, but that's fine with me.
Okay. All right, so we'll say, well, if we say quarter after, that's almost 20 minutes.
Great, see you.
Okay, thanks so much. Okay, so we're almost all back. So welcome back, everyone. We just have really two fairly quick things, I think, on the agenda. And the first one is the system for documenting our meetings and possibly changing the rules of procedure if we feel necessary. As we move more and more into this virtual world, I know there's been calls for creating some recording available for our meetings and wholeheartedly support that. The question came up as to exactly what that documentation is going to be. Is it going to be just the Zoom links that are available on our website, or will there be an additional YouTube video? And I know there are now, but there was an expression that, and the director can correct me if I'm misrepresenting this, but there was an expression that it was a little difficult or not difficult, but time consuming to have to do both the Zoom link and the YouTube. So we wanted to have that discussion and also take a look at the PEC having the Friday meetings transcribed if we're doing the videos, if we have that archived. And I know that there was a question early on as to how long the link for our Zoom meetings could last, that there may be a point in time when it gets too full and people wouldn't be able to access, earlier versions. So there should be a permanent opportunity for people to be able to go back and find meeting information. So I'm going to let the director speak in a second, but I just wanted to speak real briefly to the PEC transcripts. I appreciate the Friday actual transcripts because it's, especially lately, it's been extraordinarily helpful for me to have that, because there's often questions that come up. Hey, when did you do this? Or didn't you actually do this? And I've been able to go back to the transcripts and I can do a search in the transcript and find it, as opposed to having to sit and look through an entire video, which I've had to do on some things, not for us, but for other entities, and have to sit through a whole meeting to try to find the information. So the transcripts for me for Friday are, and they're very complete. So there's no question as to what transpired. So I appreciate and support the continuation of having the Friday transcripts. I think it's easier and I know legal counsel would be able to ask for a transcript of a recording, but I think it's just kind of cooperative to have it there. KT and then Karina.
So a couple of things that I just want to mention that may make it more difficult for CSD to upload the YouTube videos is whenever we have pauses of recordings. It generates a new video once the Zoom webinar is finished, because I've done that several times in my classes, that whenever I pause, it's actually a different video. So if we don't pause at any time during the meeting, then it's just one continuous video that can be uploaded to YouTube, and that doesn't take as long as it takes to upload. Is the amount of time and effort that's required to upload that video to YouTube. So that may be the difficulty, is linking those between pauses that I could see for CSD staff, because it does generate a new video every single time a pause is made. With the transcription part for the video, the only thing that I could suggest is, right now I pay for one that gives me I think about 5,000 or 6,000 minutes per month for $10 a month, that transcribes the video you uploaded, the video, and it does automatic transcription for that price. So I don't know if we would necessarily go over 6,000 minutes, which would be 100 hours, right, in a month. I don't think we would for that. But just maybe two things to keep in mind. I think the first part is the difficulty that they may experience, but that could easily be rectified by just keeping the recording go through any breaks we might have. And the second is the automatic transcription.
Right. Okay, thanks for that. Karina?
Yes, so mostly I'm going to turn this over to Missy Brown to speak, because she has been managing the recordings of both Zoom. She created a YouTube channel, but just to be clear, I think the question in my mind is, for Thursday work sessions, on the table right now are the written minutes that somebody creates of the work session, the Zoom recording, and the YouTube recording. And I think that that's too much. So I'm hoping that we come to a decision about what's most efficient. But I want Missy to share, because she does the Zoom recording and she does the and she created the YouTube channel.
Thank you. So it did take me a little bit of time to figure out how to do it all. But now that I know how to do it, it takes less time, less of my time. It takes more of the computer time. So yes, you can upload a video as long as it's less than 12 hours, which hopefully will not have work sessions that are more than 12 hours. But it does take a long time for the computer to process that. So it's not difficult to have the pauses, frankly. I just label them part 1 and part 2, but we can certainly stop pausing if you would like. With regards to the transcription, I would just like you all to know that Commissioner Carrillo is Commissioner Correa. Commissioner Manus is Commissioner Madness. So it's hilarious to watch the transcription. Most of the pertinent stuff, although I can't remember now what I told you, Karina, but Estancia Valley Classical Academy comes out as Allah something Classical Academy. So there's just those bits and pieces. I wouldn't want to rely on the transcription as gospel.
Right. And I think.
But it is not difficult.
Okay. And so two things. I think outside of and I thank you for dealing with the multiple days with the renewals. I mean, that was unanticipated that we wouldn't have our normal transcription of that. And I don't foresee that happening again. If I remember correctly, the company that did the video for us has the ability to actually upload themselves to YouTube, yes? I think he originally I remember an email where it said he had offered that, but I agree. And I have to ask Julia this, because it's an OMA question. So Friday we're set with. We've got our transcriber for Friday, and we've got the Zoom link recording. So if we're looking at the Thursday work session, does OMA require that we have, and I believe they do, the summary minutes available so that the recording would not be sufficient to satisfy OMA? Am I correct?
Yes, I was just gonna reference for people on the Google Drive. I've done a short memo on the various things, starting with the OMA. That it's highlighted in there that at a minimum, but it's not much, Chair, at a minimum, the date, time, place of the meeting, name of members in attendance and absence, the substance of the proposals considered, and any record of decision or votes, but you don't take any decision or votes
Right.
on a Thursday. So an example of the summary minutes with the minimum requirements are the draft minutes that are posted for the renewal, because we had the Zoom transcript, we just did what was minimally required. I have a concern myself to have much more than in the summary minutes. One, it takes time for a staff person to do that. And then it's that person's interpretation of what was important in the meeting. And I probably both as a lawyer and personally don't prefer that. I prefer for, people to make their own decisions kind of as to what's important. I do like having the draft notes with the Zoom link there. And I was going to ask KT if he's still on, or KT, can you, in a Zoom meeting or YouTube, can you flag kind of this topic started right here so that it would take you right there, so that like Commissioner Gibson wouldn't have to watch the whole meeting? Is there a way to say item 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, YouTube is now sectioning off videos. I have my own channel, and I think they're I don't know the exact proper term, but they're pretty much on all videos now. I think they're making section breaks based off their own algorithm that they can tell, okay, this part was the introduction of the meeting. This part was another thing that they talked about. So they're automatically splitting that to where you can go to those segments. But I think that that's still kind of like beta version. So I don't know if they're necessarily doing that to all videos, and if that can be done manually or not. I don't do that to my own videos. But it
could be staff time as well to do that.
Yeah.
Right, but most of 100% of the time when I'm going back and needing to look at something, it's from the Friday meeting, because it was decisions that were made and when did you vote on it and what was it? And we'll have the actual transcript of that. It's very rare that I have to go back to, I've ever had to go back to a work session, because anything that's important that comes out of the work session, we've got the paper documents that we're voting on at some later time, so that we've got that for us. So I think the biggest question is YouTube, Zoom, or both for the Thursday work session, and keeping and I agree, I think it's burdensome on staff to have to do summary minutes if they feel like they have to do these really detailed minutes, and you're right, it becomes subjective, and sometimes it's also a timing factor. If we're moving too quick, they capture this better than they capture that. And I think to keep the paper version as simple as possible and relying on the video as the documentation for the Thursday meeting, but just exactly what that's going to look like becomes the question. Do we want to just keep it as the Zoom link, or because we won't have the video, we wouldn't have the video guy here to be able to upload for the Thursday work session. Oh, I have to change that, because if we keep a hybrid model, we would have someone there recording it. So it's not just live or not. So they would be able to upload it if he still can do it, he could upload that to YouTube, take that concern from CSD, and then just have the Zoom link to the video available for us to have to worry about uploading onto the site. Katie?
I just had a quick question for Missy. Is it possible within Zoom, I know on my own account, that I could go live on YouTube? And that may
We're
just
live.
negate the...
Yeah, so apparently Julia contacted me that we were live, we are live now. So yes.
So then that would mean that we wouldn't have to necessarily upload, right? A video afterward.
I don't know if it stays on. I'll have to see if the live stays on as something that people can refer to.
Okay, yeah, because I thought that like after you went live, that the video, you could either, I guess, maybe select that it remains on YouTube or that it becomes unavailable to others. So I think
this will be something I discovered today.
Yes. Okay, sounds great. Thanks.
Yeah, that would be perfect. Julia?
Well, I just want you, and it was helpful to me to kind of think about what you do and how you want to record it. And so high stakes decisions, new applications, renewals, revocation, I just think they should be transcribed.
Yes.
I think that it's nerve-wracking not to do it, and if you lose it, you would really lose it, and that those can be appealed. And I think there's no question about that. The Friday regular meetings are what you were already addressing. They are required only by a transcript, is required only by your protocol. It's not required by the Open Meetings Act. It's not required anywhere else, but you all have chosen to do that, and that's what you have been doing. I think you have the option of keeping that, of course, but you also have the option of not doing that, and maybe as technology moves forward, not doing it. So I think that is optional. I think that someone doing correct summary minutes would not be it's a little bit of a burden. I did it during the meeting on the renewals, but it was more work than I had expected. So it's not that it's no work. The next one are the working sessions, which you were just talking about. Summary minutes as required by the OMA are required. And then some kind of a link, I think, is a reasonable thing to do. And then your subcommittee meetings, there's no minutes prepared, no required minutes, no minutes prepared. But the way that comes to you is through the reports of the subcommittee on the Friday meetings, and from the executive committee, the resulting agenda and the report from the chair. So it's not like those meetings aren't reported to you. And I see no reason nor think it's a good idea to do minutes from any of those subcommittee meetings. I think, to do it the way we've done it. So there's kind of 4 levels. And I do think it's a little bit confusing to transcribe and have a Zoom or YouTube link. I know that Cindy has raised which is the official record. And if you're going to go to the cost of having it's transcribed, which is, which is a cost, then, and that's her job. So that would be the written record. So I think if you do transcription, you only do that. I think if you do summary minutes, I like one link. I don't care if it's Zoom or YouTube. Missy, I didn't watch the YouTube yet. I'm going to watch that training later. So I'm not sure you were live. The working session, I think we should do draft minutes with a notice, and then the other, I think we shouldn't do at all.
Right. And I agree 100% that all of our high stakes, we continue what we've been doing. That there has to be the transcription, and that's community input hearings, that's the renewal hearings, and of course, new applications. But I'll also reflect back that I think the transcript of the Friday meeting is extraordinarily helpful. And not necessarily a transcript off of obviously the videos, because they can be a little wonky, but to have the official transcript, because once again, I know for me, I've had to go back a lot and try to find information. And if we didn't have that transcript, if we just had summary minutes, I wouldn't have an accurate picture of exactly what that was. And oftentimes I need, you need to look at the full discussion, and it's real easy in the transcript to do that search and find it quickly, as opposed to going through, like I said, having to watch a whole video to capture something, and sometimes you miss it and now you got to go back. So I would prefer to stay with the transcription for the Friday meeting, to stick with Cindy. Becca?
I think I'm more open to eliminating the transcript on Friday, just because it's very expensive. And if we're using taxpayer dollars for something that's not needed, and it's just for our convenience for when we need to look back, I mean, to me, that's just not a good enough reason to spend the amount of money that it costs to transcribe all those Friday meetings. And I think with the summary meetings, you still can do the search and find. I should say, I think we should still have like and maybe even if it's just internal, because there will be like weird, the way the computer translates words might be a little wonky. But if you need to search and find and it's just the computer translation, that's okay if it's a little, like if it's Korea, because we'll just know that it's Korea. Like it's not that big a deal to have like some mistakes in it. And I don't think that needs to be necessarily public. That could just be stored in our Google Drive and we can find it if we need to. But it's a lot of money for transcription. And if it's just for because we, it's what we're used to and that's what we've done and it would be easy for us, it just doesn't seem like I think there could be a more cost-effective way to do that transcription instead of live with a person doing it. And maybe the YouTube transcription or the Zoom transcriptions may be bad, but there are more sophisticated computer transcriptions now that are probably going to be a lot less and be more accurate to begin with. So I'm just more open to eliminating that if that's like the basis behind it, because it's not official. We don't need that if we have the Zoom. If we're putting all the effort and money into doing that, we don't need to do things just to do them.
There will be a cost to any kind of transcription service that is not just Zoom. I was able to edit and cut the renewal hearings into per school because I did it on my Mac. There is no way for state employees to just download free software. So anything that's a software, we will have to go through the bidding process and get that through the state.
Thanks.
So there's just a cost there as well.
Oh, sorry. Katie?
I think Commissioner Davis was before me, so I'll let.
Georgina?
Okay, thank you. So I think that a written record is always better. And also, I think that it's important that the information is accurate. So maybe it's not significant to spell a commissioner's name correctly, but there's school names and there's other words that will be spelled incorrectly. And it just feels important to me that it should be accurate.
Thanks. Katie?
I just had a question regarding the cost of the for transcription. What exactly is the cost? Do we?
Bev has that info off the.
It varies. Commissioner made us from meeting to meeting, depending on how long the meeting goes, but we have paid between $1,000 to $2,000 for meetings, depending on the length of the meeting.
So, and I guess my question for Julia is because if a attorney, if there's an appeal and an attorney asks for a transcript of the meeting, would that transcript have to come from an official service? I'm just asking legally, for the courts.
For the, it would come from an official service. I would have to check if it's required, but certainly being an associate is a court transcription. They have to verify that it's true and correct. So I'm not sure it's some kind of a certification, but that person has to say that it's true and correct. And I'm not sure that a lawyer would ever ask for the meeting. It would have to be related to a school, I think, for us to do it. And honestly, in the courts, if you want a transcription, you pay for a transcription. So
Right.
We're doing something different. And my
Right.
internet went down in the meeting where we're talking about internet. So.
Yeah, I guess my only concern is that I know the school's appealing, but the bottom line is if the school appeals and then they have to pay for the transcription, it's still coming out of public monies. So, because the school's paying for it. So.
I don't object to I don't
And
object
then
to
we
you
run
doing
into a
them.
problem with another cost with appeals that sometimes schools have to make a decision that they can't appeal because they don't have the money to do it. So that's, I have a little concern. Karina?
Actually, Commissioner Robbins' hand was up first.
I'm sorry, I don't see him on, oh, now I see him on my screen.
Yeah.
Sorry, I lost you for a moment, David. I apologize.
Thanks. Well, I understand the cost involved, but I think it's very worthwhile to have our official meetings and hearings transcribed. It's useful for our participants, it's useful for the public. And if there's a court issue, we can have that documented. I like you, Commissioner Gibson, I've gone back and looked and done a search because there have been times I've said things and I've had to make corrections in subsequent meetings. I want to make sure that my correction is the correct correction. And sometimes my notes, because, I have notebooks, I have several spirals that I've taken notes for the, almost 4 years that I've been on this commission. I take very extensive notes, but again, they are notes. It's not verbatim. And, when I'm speaking, I'm not writing down things like that. Yes, it is a cost, but, if you look at the total amount that we spend on transcriptions per year, it's in the area of about $50,000 or $60,000 looking back at past amounts that have been expended. Okay. Yes, that's a lot. But when you look at the schools are contributing $3 million of their 2% money represents $3 million or more. $60,000 is a very, very small amount. And if we weren't spending that, history says that reverts to the state anyway. So the schools aren't benefiting by us not spending that. So unless we give that money back to the schools, I think the benefit of having an official transcript for our official meetings is beneficial. And again, we don't depend upon a third-party source such as YouTube or Zoom. They can be hacked, things can be done, their information can be corrupted or destroyed, and then we're dependent upon them. I don't know that, you know, with what you pay, that there's any legal obligation that they maintain that for any, you know, they could come up, you know, next week and say, everything you had before, we're doing away with it. We're going to change it. You know, we've sold our service and they don't want to keep all that. So that again, by just relying solely on that for our official meetings, it's nice to have a recording, one or the other, Zoom or YouTube, one or the other. But I think the official transcript really is a benefit because like you said, you can go in and search it, you can find specific words. And again, every meeting we go back and we approve the minutes from the previous meeting. Well, if we don't have that transcript, does that mean we have to sit through a 4 or 5 or 6 hour meeting and then watch a 4 or 5, 6 hour video to make sure everything there is actually accurate so we can approve the minutes? Just my opinion.
Thanks. Karina?
Mostly I agree with Commissioner Robbins. I think that having a written transcript is useful. As someone who wasn't always on this side, if you will, I used to read the PEC minutes quite a bit and virtually attend by reading them. And I think that it'll be easier for us just to have a particular system that says we know there's written transcripts, end of story, as opposed to any sort of combination of video and written transcripts. And I think that that's what Julia was speaking to earlier, that it's one or the other. And I also think, you know, there is money in the budget to pay for the transcripts. And so for Friday, I think that's the way to go. The question is Thursday, and what implication, if any, do we need to have? I think that's the decision.
Right. And I think, oh, sorry, Glenna.
Thanks. So I think it's essential that we keep the written for Friday meetings. I like the summary, written summary for Thursdays that are very broad and what topics were covered, because we're not voting on anything. And as far as committee, no, I don't think we need committee minutes.
Chair, it's Julia. I'm sorry if I can't see on the phone, but that is the way it's set up right now. You wouldn't need to make any change to any document.
Okay, so I think what we need to find out is, and Steve, sorry, I just saw your hand because my screen went out for a second, so I'll be right. I think the question is when and Missy, hopefully she can find out when YouTube, if that is saved, our Thursday meetings could be set very easily, because if we can just check off the box to save, then we've got Thursday's recording taken care of and we have the summary minutes for us. And I think that's hopefully the easiest thing to do for Thursday. Steve, sorry.
Sorry, I disappeared for a while. A problem with my connectivity here. I don't know. Anyway, so I got the gist of what you're all talking about. I would say summary minutes are pretty much worthless, especially because on Thursday, that's when we have today, like right now, This is when we're having substantive discussion. And this is what the public should be hearing and or reading if they want to go back. Because when we vote on things on Friday, generally we're recapping, and that does not provide, I believe, nearly the transparency of having the record. And I know it costs more, but having the record for Thursday, that's of utmost importance to me.
Thanks. So, and this is really for discussion today. It'll be on the February agenda if there's any changes and action to be taken. But we wanted to open up the discussion today to hear from people and also to have people think about it for the February agenda. Okay. If there's no one else, we are on to our last item, actually, which is the discussion on the rules, including consideration of any public comment. And I'm going to turn this over to Julia on this item. We were fortunate that PED helped us out, and the rule was published and it's on the Sunshine Portal. But Julia, you want to?
No, I just wanted to give, we have put into the notice several times where we'll have public comments. So this morning was one of them. We'll do another one the next time as well. It's going very smoothly. Unless you all want to make any changes, I think we're right on track. I think it's, you'll be able to vote on it, have a hearing on the rulemaking in the February meeting. And I do want to echo that it was very, very helpful to have Karina and others at PET help with some of the technical notice issues, but we're on track and I think it's looking good.
So Julia, can we just talk a little bit about what that hearing is? Because it's going to be at the Friday meeting, correct?
It's going to be at the Friday meeting. It's not that much different from you discussing any other agenda item. It's just a little bit more formally done, but I think it's going to be very similar. We had to say a time, so we said 9 o'clock, so it should be the first agenda item. And then, Chair, you can act as the person to lead the rulemaking conversation. Again, we will give people an opportunity then to comment. They can have written comments up until I think it's February 1st. They could have come today. They can come to the working session. They can also come right at 9 o'clock. And then we needed to give a window. So there's a window for public comment till noon that day. So we may need to have you, after everyone, is ready to adopt the rule, you may need to just adopt the rule at 12:01. So
Okay.
it's not that different from what you usually do. I think it's going to go smoothly in what you typically do. Then that rule gets published again in the same way the notice did. And that means that you can start to use the rule in March. And in March, I am anticipating taking all of the documents that you've already been working on and seeing if anybody wants to say anything about those that you've already looked at. But I'm guessing that you probably won't, and people can give comment on them. So we'll adopt a lot of your protocols in the March meeting. And then finally, the process that Glenna has started and that many people are participating in is going to move towards looking at the contract and the performance framework. And so you'll just use that process again, probably later, not at the March meeting. I don't think you'll be ready then, but whenever you are. So I see us on track for getting all the documents up and approved by July 1, which is what the rule says. So it's really rolling out pretty smoothly.
Okay, thanks. So let me just be clear. We'll do the same thing in February that we did today with the 9:45 to 10 o'clock time period for public comment, but then Friday, I'm sorry,
There's a
Steve.
requirement.
Well, David's hand was up.
David
long
had his
before
hand,
mine.
David had his hand up first.
Yeah.
So let me just, so David has, but I just needed that clarification that that's what would be done. We would still do the Friday,
Friday.
the Thursday, I'm
it
sorry,
says
Thursday.
Thursday for 15 minutes, but Friday as well. People
Right.
can go to a hearing, a rulemaking hearing, and give comment. So
Right.
there will effectively have been 3 opportunities to give oral comment and I don't know, something like 45 or 50 days to give written comment.
Right, thanks. David?
Thank you. And you know, the oral comment, I think it's very important, and I appreciate the clarification. On the written comment, Julia, did you say February 1st is the deadline for written comments?
You know, I need to double check the document. I'll double check it. It's in the notice. It might be a little bit later. I wanted written comments before your meeting so we could consider them, because that's the point of the comment, is you might change your rule. So I'll need to double check that exact date.
Will the commissioners be provided a copy of those written comments, or are they going to be on a site in sufficient time prior to our meetings that we have time to review that? I'd hate for them to be posted on Wednesday and we have a meeting on Friday, and you know, that gives us one day to review these. You know, I would like to have, you know, a little more time, because life happens and you can't necessarily, you know, if there's one letter, that's fine. But if you have 100 letters, you know, we need sufficient time to be able to read through those comments. So that's my question of the timing and the availability of those written comments to the commission.
There is a requirement that comments be posted. So it would be posted where the rule is presently posted. And I think there's, and I might need to get back to you on this, there's a very short turnaround to get those documents posted. So they want what you just said, which is comments posted as soon as possible. And, you know, so far we don't have any written comment, and we might have more by February 1st, but I see that everything that we're going to do is consistent with what you have just said.
Thank you.
So in following up on what David just said, it would seem as though the comments should be available on the website or given to us 72 hours in advance of any meeting. The same way the material has to be, any material for a meeting has to be 72 hours in advance as well, as I understand it, in keeping with the Open Meetings Act. And so in this case, the next meeting, work session anyway, is the 17th. So we would have to have all that information, and anything can be posted by, say, AM on the 14th or PM on the 13th of February. So that's relative to the comments. Also relative to comments, absolutely not. I don't think it should be at 9:45 before a 10 o'clock meeting, or before a work session, or 8:45. To do that before a meeting, if a lot of us aren't on, it prevents us from hearing the comments. Now, of course, today there were 4 of us on, or 3, and there were no comments. But I think as a matter of practice, anytime there's going to be public comment where it's going to be a part of our meeting, and you know, on Zoom or in person, it needs to be after the meeting has begun, the official meeting of the commission. So if we're going to have a work session 10 o'clock on the 17th, then, you know, public comment would come at 10 o'clock on the 17th. And hold on, because I see you're leaning. And then
No, so I wasn't. I was moving for some other reason.
Okay, thank you. And then also, Not sure why we don't do this, but it would seem to be valuable to take roll for work sessions as well. Just as a matter of record, people are coming in and out of a meeting, like I was out for like 10, 15 minutes while, just so the record shows who's, coming in at 12 o'clock or whatever it might be. So there's that. And the other thing is there were some really valuable chats over the last 10 minutes, but chats violate the Open Meetings Act. It's so when people have, because it's not accessible to the public in the meeting. So we shouldn't be chatting ideas back and forth. It's one thing to send a website link, but it's a completely other idea to send one's opinion about an issue. It's a violation for that to be in the chat. And I guess I have one more. I guess I have one more thing that I've never really understood for the last year. Zoom has this amazing thing. It's on the bottom right to raise hand and lower hand, because then it lets the moderator, or in this case, the host, our Chair Gibson, know that someone's got a hand up instead of us having to go like this. And then also it lets her know the order in which hands came up. And I would suggest that we all start using that. Now, I know that for 6 years or whatever, no one has, but there is no logical reason not to. It makes the meeting easier. It makes it run smoother. It's easier on the chair. And it's right there in the lower, all the way down in the lower right, where it says raise hand or lower hand. So anyway, Chair, can we start doing that, please? Like in tomorrow's meeting, maybe?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
And thank you for the chat thing, because we've reminded commissioners often that we should not be using the chat. We tried to get the chat shut off and we can't. People sometimes get annoyed with me because they put something in the chat. I never look at it. It doesn't pop up. I don't look at it because we're at this meeting. So thanks for that reminder. We do take, usually I do ask Becca to take roll. I apologize, I didn't do it, but we do have in our summary minutes, there is a notice of everyone who was here. So there, we do have, we do have that in the work session. So, and I apologize because we started with that. And the only reason we started at 9:45 today for that public comment, and it was, I think it was just a little wonky the way it was noticed, because the charter school staff has other things that they do. So they're not on till 10 o'clock. So I said, well, then let's use 9:45 to 10 before the staff can get on so that we can do the public comment. But we'll certainly notice it better so that it looks like the meeting is starting at 9:45. But I didn't want the charter school staff, although Missy has to be here to manage this for us. But that was the intention, to try to not take up, and we had the 10 o'clock already committed for the training.
Right.
So we were kind of
hammered
with that. So I apologize for that.
Anyway, so I raised my hand. So I agree. We need to have some Zoom protocol because, and Steve, we haven't been doing this for 6 years. We've only been on Zoom for 1.5 years. So I think we need to, it would be nice to have some Zoom norms for our meetings, because I think like muting when you're not talking, just simple things like that, and using the hand weight, the lower raising hand thing. I mean, it would be really more efficient if we did do that. That's going to put.
And Glenna, I have to say, I didn't see your hand. It didn't come up on my screen.
Okay, well, I don't know. I saw it. But anyway, so that's going to put more on you, Patty, because you're going to have to be looking at everybody's, everybody's thing and being able to, track all that.
Well, let's hope that we won't have to be looking at too many on a screen in February, and that will be live, which will make it easier, harder. So I don't know which. Oh, Missy. And see, you jumped around on my screen again, sorry.
Right. No, that's not what I would say. So when you did the renewal hearings and we were all in person, I know that somebody had told you, because Commissioner, I heard you say we were told not to be on Zoom if we are in person. But I think that for the Zoom audience, it was better. So like when Commissioner Robbins was talking, when he was in person, but he was also on Zoom, he could be seen on the screen. I mean, I know we had the, the large video and everything, but it's just something to consider, that if you were all there and also visible on Zoom, it would be easier to see everybody's face than the long view of the video. So you don't have to, just a comment.
Right. I have to say, the only challenge with that is when we were live, for me, I had the meeting documents in front of me and I didn't have my Zoom screen on. So I needed to rely on the big screen to be able to see people, because I had my documents that I was reading off of on my device. So, but it is, and I think we were through several of the hearings before we even realized that when someone turned off their video, they dropped off that big screen. So that was a little challenging in a way, but also I think in some ways informative, because if you can't see someone, you don't know if they're there or not.
I just wonder, we're learning, all of us, we have to admit that we're learning this technology and the pros and cons. But I wonder if we've gotten any feedback from our hybrid meeting about the virtual participants. Were they able to hear everybody that was in person? And that would be good feedback for us, because I know there's some meetings that I'm on, some other school board meetings, that if I'm on Zoom, I have a really hard time hearing the room because of the air conditioning turning on or the heater and background noise. So I'm just wondering if, Missy, you've gotten any feedback from the virtual participants.
No, ma'am, I have not gotten any feedback. And I've just realized, so Commissioner Gibson, I know everybody jumps around with the hand raising. But what they do is the people who have their hand raised go to the upper left corner of the screen. So it'd just be easier to look over there. But I didn't get any feedback.
And see, I can barely see David's, because his bookcase is almost the same color as his hand. So it just blends right in. It's like I had to look really hard to find that hand. So, and I think that was Glenna's problem. You've got that yellow right where your hand would have been. So I never saw the hand. So David,
we should have blue hands.
I know. It used to be blue. I don't know what, on my screen, it used to be blue, and then so I don't know. So David, sorry. David, you're muted.
Thank you. For the hearings, I wasn't able to go to Las Cruces in the couple of days that we had up in Santa Fe. I wasn't able to be there. And it was somewhat confusing to know who was speaking. Now in Cruces, they did a really good job of moving the cameras around, and apparently they had very good cameras and things like that. That was better, but the setup at Mayberry was very, very confusing when I watched that on the Wednesday and Thursday. Very confusing. It gave you this kind of panorama, and sometimes 3 or 4 people were showing up in the panorama, and I really couldn't tell exactly who was speaking, and other people, things were going on. So it was a little bit disruptive. Like I said, in Cruces, that was much better, but I think they had multiple cameras that they could turn and everything. That's why, when I was in Santa Fe on that Friday for our December meeting, I used the Zoom, and, again, I could turn my camera off or whatever if that's preferable, but I'd like to be able to see the individual, and you really don't get that, and I didn't have that as clearly in Santa Fe as they did in Cruces. So that's something to just consider. You know, we want to be available to the public, I think, and let them see us, not just hear us. You know, otherwise we could just do this on radio, I guess. So being able to see people's expressions and things like that, how they react to the various comments, I think is important for people to see.
Yeah, thanks. And you know, we've kind of digressed from the topic, but Katie.
I think Director Chavez was ahead of me.
Well, I was say the same thing that Commissioner Robbins said, which is that Las Cruces had a setup where there are screens that pop up with cameras, and that's why when the person spoke, you can see their face. And yeah, I missed also being able to see expressions of individual people's faces because it was sort of zoomed out. But nonetheless, I think that the audio worked all right, and that's what we were paying for. So the people that attended virtually pretty much got to hear how the meeting went. KT probably will add to that.
Okay, thanks. KT?
To be honest with you, I liked the meetings all week. I think they worked out well. I didn't have any issue, but I kind of knew what to expect as I had looked at the system with Commissioner Boyd. And so I kind of knew going in what I would be seeing, and I thought it worked out great. But that's just me, because my expectations were already clear going in.
I thought you were going to say your expectations were already low. So, all right. So thanks everyone, and please take into consideration the discussion on how we are recording, especially our Thursday meetings. And like I said, it'll be on the February agenda for any action if we feel we need to take some action. And I think we're done for today.
I just want to remind the commissioners, I just would like to remind the commissioners, if you're going to want to use the raised hand, you also have to remember to lower your hand, or I will lower your hand for you. I'll get my ruler out and smack it.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. See you tomorrow morning.
Bye.